Hi there! In this video, we will discuss the summary of each chapter of Noli Me Tangere, from Chapter 1 to Chapter 64. Let's begin. Chapter 1. A Social Gathering. The chapter describes a grand feast prepared by Capitan Tiago at his house on Calle Anloa Gay to welcome a young man who had just returned from Europe. Many guests attended, including prominent members of society, clergy, and some Spanish officials. Tia Isabel took charge of welcoming the guests, who were divided into two groups, the women and the men. Among the attendees were the couple Dr. de Espadañas and Doña Victorina, as well as the priests Padre Sibila and Padre Damaso. The guests engaged in various discussions, and one of the heated topics was about Filipinos or Indios, the removal of Padre Damaso from the parish of San Diego, and the tobacco and gunpowder monopolies. During the gathering, Padre Damaso did not miss the chance to mock Filipinos, calling them lowly and inferior. Padre Sibila tried to change the subject, and they discussed the reason for Padre Damaso's removal from the San Diego parish. Lieutenant Guevara explained that Padre Damaso's removal was justified because he had ordered the exhumation of the body of a nobleman who was accused of being a heretic. This made Padre Damaso even angrier, but Padre Sibila calmed the situation again. The discussion continued and expanded to other topics until the gathering ended. Chapter 2. Crisostomo Ibarra. In this chapter, we meet Juan Crisostomo Ibarra y Magdalene, or Crisostomo Ibarra. He is the only son of the late Don Rafael Ibarra. The young man is clearly still in mourning when he arrives at Captain Tiago's house, as seen by the color of his clothes. He has just returned from Europe, where he spent 7 years studying. He introduced himself to the guests and shook their hands, a custom he learned in Germany. However, Padre Damaso stood out among the guests. Instead of shaking Ibarra's hand, he turned his back on him. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Guevara approached Ibarra and thanked him for his safe arrival. Ibarra felt comforted when the lieutenant praised his father. Because of this, Padre Damaso secretly gave the lieutenant a threatening look, prompting him to end his conversation with Ibarra. As dinner approached, Captain Tinong invited Ibarra to lunch the next day. However, Ibarra politely declined the invitation, explaining that he had to go to San Diego. Captain Tinong is a close friend of Captain Tiago and was also a friend of Ibarra's father. Chapter 3. The Dinner. Dinner was ready, and the guests were beginning to gather around the dining table. While Padre Sibila's face showed joy at the feast, Padre Damaso was the complete opposite. The priest was visibly annoyed, his irritation clear on his face. Lieutenant Guevara, meanwhile, was distracted by Doña Victorina's curly hair. He didn't notice that he had stepped on the hem of her dress, which annoyed the lady. Crisostomo Ibarra took his seat at the head of the table. At the other end, the two priests were arguing over who should sit there. Padre Damaso insisted that Padre Sibila should take the seat because he was the parish priest of the area. However, Padre Sibila refused, saying that Padre Damaso should sit there instead, as he was the confessor of Captain Tiago's family. Eventually, Padre Sibila offered the seat to the lieutenant, who politely declined. Captain Tiago also refused when Ibarra invited him to sit there. When the food was served, Padre Damaso became even more annoyed because the portion of the chicken soup he received was mostly necks and wings. Unbeknownst to him, the special part of the soup was reserved for Ibarra. As they ate, Ibarra shared his experiences studying in Europe, including his observations of the countries he visited and how he never forgot his homeland. Despite his respectful tone, Padre Damaso insulted him, calling his education in Europe a waste of money. Ibarra calmly accepted the insult and instead mentioned how Padre Damaso had been a close friend of his father, which silenced the priest. Lieutenant Guevara realized that Ibarra had no idea about the circumstances of his father's death. After the gathering, Ibarra left early, so he did not get to see Maria Clara, Captain Tiago's daughter. Chapter 4. Heretic and Filibuster. Ibarra walked along the road toward the plaza of Binondo. He noticed that nothing had changed in the area, even though he had been away from the Philippines for 7 years. Lieutenant Guevara spotted him, tapped him on the shoulder, and walked alongside the young man. Ibarra asked the lieutenant if he knew the reason behind his father's death. As they walked, the lieutenant recounted what had happened to Don Rafael Ibarra. According to the lieutenant, aside from being the wealthiest man in the province, Ibarra's father was naturally helpful. Because of this, many people loved him. However, despite Don Rafael's kindness, many were also envious of him. This included the friars, led by Padre Damaso. Just a few months before Ibarra left for Europe, Don Rafael and Padre Damaso had become hostile toward each other. Because of this, Don Rafael decided not to go to confession anymore. This further angered the priests. Around that time, there was a Spanish artilleryman who became the target of ridicule because of his ignorance. One day, the artilleryman was given a document. He pretended to read it, which made a group of children laugh at him. Enraged, the Spaniard chased the children. When he couldn't catch them, he threw his cane at them. He hit one child, and when the boy fell, the Spaniard kicked him. Don Rafael saw what the Spaniard did to the child and intervened. According to rumors, Don Rafael struck the Spaniard until his head hit a large rock. This caused the Spaniard to vomit blood and eventually die. The civil guards investigated the incident, and Don Rafael was arrested and imprisoned. His secret enemies also came forward. They accused Don Rafael of being a heretic and a subversive. He was also accused of land grabbing and other illegal means of gaining wealth. Other accusations against the poor Don Rafael included reading El Correo de Ultramar and other banned materials, hiding letters and pictures from an executed priest, befriending and sheltering bandits, and wearing a barong Tagalog. Only Lieutenant Guevara stood by Don Rafael. He pleaded with the lieutenant to find him a Spanish lawyer to help with his case. Don Rafael also fell ill while in prison and eventually passed away. Not a single relative or friend came to his aid. It was a pity because it was only after Don Rafael's death that he was proven innocent. Chapter 5. A Star in a Dark Night. Crisostomo Ibarra traveled to Manila and stayed at Fonda de Lala. While in his room, he reflected on the painful fate of his father. As he glanced out the window, he saw the brightly lit house of Capitan Tiago across the river. In that house, a celebration was taking place, and Ibarra could hear the sound of the orchestra and the clinking of utensils. Meanwhile, Maria Clara, the only daughter of Capitan Tiago, arrived at the celebration. She was greeted by her friends, childhood companions, Spaniards, priests close to her father, Filipinos, Chinese, and military officers. She wore an elegant outfit adorned with diamonds and gold, and she became the center of attention because of her beauty. Doña Victorina, on the other hand, patiently fixed Maria Clara's hair. Padre Salvi, who had a fondness for beautiful women, was overjoyed to be in the company of the young ladies there, especially Maria Clara, whom he secretly admired. While Ibarra easily fell asleep, Padre Salvi was restless and unable to sleep because of his thoughts about Maria Clara. Chapter 6. Capitan Tiago. Captain Tiago was the son of a sugar merchant from Malabon. Although he did not receive a formal education, he was taught by a Dominican priest. After his father's death, he continued the family business and met Pia Alba from Santa Cruz. They got married and became part of high society because of their wealth and success in business. Captain Tiago had a dark complexion, was short, and had a round face, which was marred by his habit of chewing betel nut and smoking. As a gobernadorcillo, he looked down on Filipinos and supported the abuses of the Spaniards. He believed that the Spaniards were noble and deserved respect and admiration. He was close to those in power, especially the priests. Captain Tiago was wealthy, owning properties such as land in San Diego. It was there that he met Padre Damaso and Don Rafael Ibarra. During their 6 years of marriage, he and Pia Alba had no children. They made a vow in Obando, but Pia Alba became ill after giving birth, which led to her death. Unknown to Captain Tiago, Padre Damaso had assaulted his wife, and the truth would eventually come to light. Their child was named Maria Clara and was raised by her aunt, Tia Isabel. She grew up close to Crisostomo Ibarra, who had gone to Europe to study medicine. Captain Tiago and Don Rafael agreed that Maria Clara and Ibarra would marry in the future, a plan that neither of them opposed because of their mutual affection. Chapter 7. An Idyll on an Azotea. One early morning, Maria Clara and Tia Isabel had already attended Mass. After breakfast, everyone went about their tasks. Tia Isabel cleaned, Captain Tiago read business documents, and Maria Clara sewed while talking to her father to distract herself from her nervousness about meeting her fiancé, Crisostomo Ibarra. They decided to take a vacation in San Diego because the town fiesta was approaching. When Ibarra arrived, Maria Clara couldn't contain her excitement. With Tia Isabel's help, Maria Clara prepared herself, and she and Ibarra met in the hall. Both were overjoyed to see each other. The two went to the balcony to have some privacy and avoid the dust. They talked seriously about their feelings, promises, and past. They also reminisced about the memories and things they had given each other, like the sambong leaves and Ibarra's letter. Maria Clara read the letter, which explained that Don Rafael's goal was to send Ibarra abroad to study so he could serve their town better. Ibarra then remembered that the next day was All Saints' Day, so he said goodbye to take care of his tasks. Maria Clara couldn't hold back her tears, missing her beloved. Her father advised her to light 2 candles for Ibarra and offer them to the patron saint of travelers. Chapter 8. Recollections. In this chapter, Crisostomo Ibarra traveled through Manila in a horse-drawn carriage. As he traveled, he noticed the sights around him, which brought back memories of his youth. Even though he had been away for a long time, he realized that his hometown had barely changed. The people, carriages, carts, and shops looked the same as before, but the Escolta area, which should have become more developed, seemed to have deteriorated instead. While traveling, Ibarra thought about what his teacher, a priest, had told him about wisdom. First, wisdom can be achieved if the heart truly desires it. Second, wisdom must be nurtured and passed on to future generations. Third, foreigners who take wealth from a country should give back in the form of knowledge and education. He reflected on how Manila appeared neglected and had not progressed as he had hoped. Chapter 9. Local Affairs. Maria Clara was set to retrieve her belongings from the convent. While Tia Isabel waited for the carriage, Padre Damaso arrived and went to Captain Tiago's house. He immediately told the captain to stop Maria Clara's relationship with Ibarra, claiming he was like a second father to the young woman and that his advice should be followed. Captain Tiago was convinced by Padre Damaso's words, so he extinguished the candles Maria Clara had lit for Ibarra's safe journey back to San Diego. Meanwhile, Padre Sibila went to the Dominican convent at Puerta de Isabel II to visit a sick priest. While talking, Padre Sibila shared the events at Captain Tiago's house, including Padre Damaso's interference and the lieutenant's siding with the captain general. The old priest also shared his thoughts on the rising taxes and the depletion of their wealth, as well as the growing awareness of Filipinos about property ownership. Chapter 10. The Town. This chapter describes San Diego, a small, legendary town located near a lake. San Diego is a simple place where most people rely on farming for their livelihood. However, because they lack education and business knowledge, they are often taken advantage of by Chinese traders. From the church in San Diego, you can see a forest surrounded by farmland. Like many towns in the Philippines, San Diego is controlled by the church, with the government simply following its lead. Padre Damaso was the former parish priest in the area, but was later transferred because of his mistreatment of Don Rafael Ibarra, Crisostomo Ibarra's father. According to legend, an old Spaniard came to San Diego and bought the forest in the area. Later, the old man was found hanging from a balete tree, which terrified the people of San Diego. His properties were inherited by his son Saturnino, who married a woman from Manila and settled in San Diego. They had a son named Don Rafael, who became well respected among the farmers and helped transform San Diego from a small village into a town. Don Rafael's leadership brought progress to San Diego, but it also stirred jealousy and resentment among some of his friends and fellow landowners. Chapter 11. The Rulers. In the town of San Diego, only a few people are considered powerful. Power in the town is highly contested, much like in historical conflicts in Rome and Italy. Although Don Rafael and Captain Tiago are wealthy and well-respected, they are not part of the group of powerful individuals. Even government positions in the town can be bought for as little as 5,000 pesos. The real authorities in San Diego are the parish priest and the military chief, the alferez. Padre Bernardo Salvi, a young Franciscan priest, replaced Padre Damaso as the town's parish priest. He is kinder than his predecessor, but appears frail and sickly. Meanwhile, the alferez is known for being a drunkard, abusive to his wife, and cruel to his soldiers. There is a secret rivalry between Padre Salvi and the alferez as they compete for power, but in public they pretend to get along. Chapter 12, All Saints. This chapter describes the dark and eerie atmosphere of the San Diego Cemetery at night. It is a historic place surrounded by bamboo and old walls, with a large cross in the center. The path to the cemetery is narrow and overgrown, becoming muddy during the rainy season and dusty during the dry season. Despite heavy rain, 2 people were digging in the cemetery. One was an experienced gravedigger, while the other was a nervous newcomer. They were exhuming a body that had been buried only 20 days earlier. The order to dig up and move the body to the Chinese cemetery came from Padre Garrote, who is also known as Padre Damaso, the parish priest at the time. Chapter 13, Signs of Storm. Crisostomo Ibarra arrived in San Diego and immediately went to the cemetery to visit the grave of his late father, Don Rafael. Accompanied by their elderly caretaker, he was eager to pay his respects. However, upon reaching the burial site, they discovered that the cross marking the grave was missing and the ground had been disturbed. Perplexed, they sought answers from the gravedigger, who hesitantly revealed the shocking truth. Following orders from the town's fat curate, the priest had the body exhumed. It was supposed to be transferred to the Chinese cemetery, but due to the weight of the corpse and the difficulty of transporting it on a rainy night, the gravedigger made the horrifying decision to throw Don Rafael's remains into the lake. Overcome with grief and rage, Ibarra confronted the gravedigger but quickly realized the man was merely a pawn in a greater scheme. Unable to contain his emotions, he left the cemetery in anguish, stepping on graves and crosses as he stormed away. His fury led him to seek out the parish priest, and on his way, he encountered Padre Salvi. Seizing the friar by the shoulders, Ibarra demanded an explanation, but the priest, paralyzed with fear, insisted that he was not responsible. He finally confessed that it was Padre Damaso who had orchestrated the desecration of Don Rafael's grave. Shaken to the core, Ibarra released Padre Salvi and hurried away, his mind tormented by grief and the revelation of the priest's cruelty. As the winds picked up and storm clouds gathered, Ibarra moved as if escaping not only the town, but also the weight of his father's tragic fate. Chapter 14, Tasio, Lunatic or Sage. In this chapter, Pilosopo Tasio visited the grave of his late wife, while Ibarra also went to his father's grave. Don Anastasio, better known as Pilosopo Tasio, is a well-known figure in San Diego because of his unusual personality and deep opinions on politics and society. Many people called him crazy because they didn't understand him. Tasio came from a wealthy family and was very intelligent. Despite his mother's opposition to his education and marriage, he pursued his studies and continued reading books throughout his life. As a storm approached, Pilosopo Tasio still showed a strange kind of happiness. He shared his philosophical thoughts about the storm and lightning. At the church, he encountered the young sacristans Basilio and Crispin, and he advised them to go home because their mother had prepared a special meal for them. However, the boys couldn't leave due to their responsibilities at the church. Tasio also visited the home of Don Filippo and Aling Doray, where they discussed the return of Ibarra and the fate of his father. Their conversation later shifted to the topic of purgatory. Although people laughed at Tasio, he respected religious views on purgatory, seeing it as a guide to help people live clean and virtuous lives. Chapter 15, The Sacristans. In this chapter, the sacristan brothers Crispin and Basilio, children of Sisa, are introduced. They are facing serious problems, especially Crispin, who has been accused by the priest of stealing 2 gold coins, equivalent to 32 pesos. Because of their low income, Crispin cannot afford to pay for the money he is accused of stealing. He asked Basilio to help him pay, but Basilio refused because he also needed to help their mother. During their conversation, Crispin expressed his sadness and longing for their mother, as well as his fear of receiving harsher punishment from the priests. While they were talking, the sacristan mayor suddenly arrived and became angry at what he overheard. He fined Basilio and forbade Crispin from leaving until the missing money was returned. When Basilio tried to reason with him, things only got worse, and he was forced to leave late at night, a dangerous time for a child to be outside. Meanwhile, the sacristan mayor dragged Crispin away, and Basilio heard his brother crying out in pain but felt helpless to intervene. Overwhelmed with fear and despair, Basilio decided to escape from the bell tower using the bell rope. Chapter 16, Sisa. This chapter tells the story of Sisa, the mother of Crispin and Basilio. She is a poor woman who lives in a small hut outside the town. Although she was naturally beautiful, her beauty faded over time due to the hardships and suffering she endured. She married a lazy, irresponsible, and gambling husband who brought her nothing but pain and sorrow. He often beat her, but despite this, she continued to love him and endure everything. On this day, Sisa prepared a special meal for her sons because they rarely had good food. She cooked their favorite dishes, but before the boys arrived, her husband came home first and ate everything she had prepared. He didn't even ask about his family's situation and instead demanded money from the boys' earnings. Sisa was heartbroken that there was no longer a special meal for her children. She cooked again so they would have something to eat, but while waiting, she heard Basilio calling out loudly. Chapter 17, Basilio. Basilio arrived at their house covered in blood because he had been chased by the civil guards and grazed by a bullet on his head. He was afraid of being arrested and taken to the barracks, so he didn't stop walking until he got home. He begged his mother, Sisa, to tell people he had just fallen from a tree instead of revealing what really happened. Sisa also found out that Crispin, her younger son, had been accused of stealing 2 ounces of gold, which deeply saddened her. Basilio didn't tell his mother about the suffering Crispin was enduring at the hands of the head sacristan and the priest. When he learned that their father, known for being cruel and abusive, had returned, he lost his appetite. Basilio was furious, and even said it would be better if their father were gone so they could have a better life. Sisa was heartbroken by her son's words, but she still showed love for her husband despite his abuse. Exhausted and worried, Basilio fell asleep, but he had a nightmare about the priest and the head sacristan beating Crispin. He woke up when his mother shook him, and instead of sharing his dream, he told her about his wish to stop being a sacristan. Basilio wanted to become a cow and carabao herder, and eventually, he dreamed of having a small piece of land to farm. He hoped to improve their lives, send his brother to study with philosopher Tasio, and stop Sisa from sewing. Although Sisa was happy about her son's dreams, she was hurt because Basilio didn't include their father in his plans. Chapter 18, Souls in Torment. Padre Salvi conducted a dull and lifeless mass that day, while the elders were busy discussing the upcoming town fiesta and the purchase of indulgences for the salvation of souls suffering in purgatory. As the elders talked, Sisa arrived carrying an offering for the priests, fresh vegetables and Padre Salvi's favorite fern. She went to the convent kitchen to arrange her gifts, but the sacristans and convent staff ignored her, except for the cook who spoke to her. During their conversation, Sisa learned that Padre Salvi was sick, and she wouldn't be able to talk to him. She was shocked to hear that her son Crispin had run away with Basilio after being accused of stealing 2 ounces of gold, and that the civil guards were already on their way to their house to arrest her sons. The cook laughed at and mocked Sisa, blaming her for failing to teach her children good morals and saying they took after their worthless father. Chapter 19, A Schoolmaster's Difficulties. Ibarra and the teacher met by the lake in San Diego. The teacher showed Ibarra where the body of his father, Don Rafael, had been thrown and mentioned that Lieutenant Guevara was one of those who buried him. The teacher also shared the problems facing education in their town, including the lack of funds for materials, the absence of proper classrooms, the interference of priests in teaching methods, and the lack of unity between parents and authorities. According to the teacher, Padre Damaso often interfered with his teaching, hitting and cursing the children whenever there was noise from their class. Although the teacher gained some freedom to adapt his lessons after Padre Damaso was replaced, the church still prioritized religious instruction over other subjects. Ibarra promised to do his best to help the teacher and improve the education system in San Diego. He mentioned that he would bring up these issues at a meeting hosted by the lieutenant mayor. Chapter 20. The meeting in the town hall. Ibarra and the teacher attended a meeting at the tribunal, the hall where the powerful and wealthy people of San Diego held their gatherings and discussions. The meeting was about the upcoming town fiesta and the construction of a school for the town. The attendees were divided into two groups: the conservatives, led by the cabeza, and the liberals, led by Don Filippo. There was a discussion about the programs and activities planned for the fiesta. Don Filippo suggested creating a detailed list of expenses, building a large stage in the plaza, and holding a week-long comedy show. He also proposed using fireworks for added excitement. However, the cabeza opposed this, proposing a simpler celebration with no fireworks and ensuring that only locals would participate in the programs. The focus of the performances should be on Filipino traditions. In the end, the proposals from both groups were overruled because the parish priest had already decided on the fiesta activities. There would be 6 processions, 3 sermons, 3 high masses, and 1 comedy show, showing the strong influence of the church on the town's decisions. Chapter 21. The Story of a Mother. After hearing the news from the cook about the possible arrest of her children, Sisa hurried home. When she arrived, she saw the civil guards leaving their house, but her children were not with them. She felt a little relief, but it didn't last long. The civil guards stopped her on the road and forced her to confess about the missing 2 ounces of gold that her children were accused of stealing. Sisa begged for mercy, but no one listened to her. Instead, the civil guards dragged her to the barracks, humiliating her in front of the townspeople who had just come out of the church. When they reached the barracks, they threw her on the floor and no one cared to listen to her pleas. By noon, the alferez released her because he didn't believe the priest's accusations, and she returned home. When she got home, she searched for her children but found no one. The only thing she saw was Basilio's torn and bloodied clothes, which deepened her grief. Sisa couldn't accept what she saw, and her mind completely broke. She wandered the streets, calling out the names of her children, Basilio and Crispin. Chapter 22. Lights and Shadows. Maria Clara and Tia Isabel arrived in San Diego to attend the town fiesta. News of Maria Clara's arrival spread quickly, as she was loved and admired by the people of San Diego. At the same time, Maria Clara noticed the strange behavior and stares of Padre Salvi whenever she was near him, which made her feel uneasy. Meanwhile, Maria Clara and Ibarra planned to have a picnic with their friends by the river, but Maria Clara suggested not inviting Padre Salvi because of her fear and discomfort around the priest. Although Maria Clara was worried, Ibarra did not agree with the idea of excluding Padre Salvi, as it would not look good in the eyes of others. During their conversation, Padre Salvi suddenly arrived and Ibarra invited him to join the picnic, which the priest immediately accepted. After the conversation, Ibarra went home. On the way, he met a man asking for help for his wife, who had gone mad and his missing children. Ibarra took the time to listen and told the man to walk with him, so he could share his problems as they headed to their destination. Chapter 23. Fishing. The women and men eagerly prepared for their picnic. Everyone gathered early and walked to the picnic spot. The women, including Maria Clara, Iday, Victorina, Naneng, and Sinang, rowed together in one boat. Despite the lively conversations and laughter among the young women, Tia Isabel quieted them down. Meanwhile, the men's boat had a hole, forcing them to move to the women's boat, which caused some awkwardness and silence. Elias continued to row while Maria Clara sang a kundiman to entertain the group. When they reached Capitan Tiago's fish corral, they faced a problem while fishing because no fish were caught in the net. When Leon checked, they discovered there was a crocodile in the river. Elias, the boatman, decided to go down and catch the crocodile. He successfully tied its neck, but due to its strong movements, he was dragged and fell into the water. Ibarra immediately jumped in to save the boatman, and with the help of others, they killed the crocodile. Everyone cheered, especially Maria Clara, who was deeply worried about Ibarra's safety. Maria Clara noticed that the boatman looked sad even though he had become the hero of the incident. They continued sailing and had their picnic in the woods, where they sang and enjoyed themselves, savoring the beautiful morning. Chapter 24. In the Wood. After celebrating an early mass, Padre Salvi quickly went to the picnic area in a carriage. He stopped it from a distance to observe the women, which delighted him, especially when he saw their cheerful behavior. While hiding, he overheard the young women making fun of him, and their jokes deeply hurt him. After lunch, Padre Salvi mentioned that someone had insulted Padre Damaso, which made him fall ill. Sisa also arrived at the scene, but left immediately because she had lost her sanity. A disagreement arose between Don Filippo and Padre Salvi about the disappearance of Sisa's children. Don Filippo argued that the lives of the children were more important than the missing 2 ounces of gold. Ibarra stepped in to prevent the argument from escalating. When the young men and women started playing Wheel of Fortune, Ibarra asked about his fate and learned that his plans were just dreams. He disagreed, saying his plan to build a school was certain. He then handed the permit for the school construction to Maria Clara and Sinang. Suddenly, Padre Salvi arrived and tore the book of the game, saying it was a great sin to believe in it. Albino got annoyed and confronted the priest, saying it was a bigger sin to interfere with others' belongings. The priest left in a huff, but soon after, the civil guards arrived with the sergeant looking for Elias, who was accused of attacking Padre Damaso. They also questioned Ibarra's decision to shelter Elias. Ibarra told them the civil guards had no right to question his decisions. Despite searching the forest, the civil guards did not find what they were looking for. Chapter 25. In the House of the Sage. Ibarra went to Pilosopo Tasio's house to seek advice about his plan to build a school. Tasio was busy writing in hieroglyphics, but despite this, he still invited Ibarra to talk. The philosopher shared that his writings were not for the present but for the next generation, who would be more aware and have a deeper understanding of society. Ibarra expressed his dream of building a school but admitted that he felt like a stranger in his own town. Pilosopo Tasio advised him to approach the powerful figures in society, like the priests, to achieve his plans. However, Ibarra believed that he shouldn't compromise his righteous goals and hoped that the government and the people would support him. Pilosopo Tasio explained that the church's power was greater than the government's, and if Ibarra wanted to succeed, he would need to bow to those in power. The philosopher compared Ibarra's views to a plant growing in rocky soil that needed support to avoid falling. In the end, Pilosopo Tasio inspired Ibarra, saying that even if he didn't succeed, others would continue what he had started. Ibarra said goodbye to Pilosopo Tasio after their meaningful conversation. Chapter 26. The Eve of the Fiesta. Every 10th of November is the eve of the fiesta in San Diego. On this day, the whole town is busy preparing. Houses are decorated with lavish decorations, curtains, and antique items. The dining tables of the wealthy are filled with various delicious dishes, rice cakes, desserts, and expensive wines from Europe. The fiesta is not only for the people of San Diego but also for visitors from other towns. The whole town is filled with the noise of fireworks, church bells, and music from the band. The plaza of San Diego and the front of the church are decorated with bamboo arches and covered with tents for the procession. A stage is set up for the comedy show and other performances. Captain Tiago, Captain Joaquin, the Chinese man Carlos, and other wealthy townspeople are actively participating in the festivities. Padre Damaso will hold Mass in the morning. While the town is busy preparing, Ibarra is also busy finishing the schoolhouse he is building near his home under the supervision of Nol Juan. Ibarra is covering all the expenses for the construction of the school, and he politely declined offers of help from the wealthy and the priests. The school is similar to those in Europe, with separate areas for boys and girls, and facilities for planting trees, vegetables, a storage room, and a disciplinary room. Many admired Ibarra for his project, but despite this, he also gained many secret enemies. Chapter 27. In the Twilight. The story begins with Captain Tiago preparing for the fiesta. which he made extra lavish to show his support for Ibarra, whom he considers his future son-in-law. Captain Tiago knows that Ibarra is well known in Manila, so he takes the opportunity to associate himself with Ibarra's success and gain praise in the newspapers. Captain Tiago prepared many delicious foods and drinks from abroad and even gave Maria Clara expensive gifts. In the afternoon, Ibarra and Captain Tiago met. Maria Clara asked permission to go for a walk with her friends and invited Ibarra to join them, which he accepted. Captain Tiago invited Ibarra to have dinner with them since Padre Damaso would be coming, but Ibarra politely declined. The couple walked with the young women and passed by Sinang's house, who also joined them. At the town plaza, they were approached by a leper whom everyone avoided. Maria Clara felt pity for the leper and gave him the gift her father had given her, surprising her friends. Sisa also approached and spoke to the leper, saying his children were in the bell tower. Sisa left, humming a tune, while the leper also left, carrying Maria Clara's gift. Maria Clara realized that there were many poor and unfortunate people she had not noticed before. Chapter 28. Correspondence. The events of the San Diego fiesta were reported in a Manila newspaper. The news included the lavish celebration, the town's prominent figures, the programs held, and the musicians who performed. It also mentioned the priests and the comedy show that took place in the town, along with its talented actors. Only the Spaniards enjoyed the comedy because it was performed in Spanish, while the Filipinos enjoyed the Tagalog version. Ibarra did not attend these shows. The next day, there was a procession for the saints, followed by a mass led by Padre Manuel Martin. There was also a dance led by Captain Tiago and his daughter Maria Clara, though the young woman found it boring. Due to her boredom and the long time since she had last seen Ibarra, Maria Clara wrote a letter to her sweetheart, asking him to visit her and invite her to the inauguration of the schoolhouse he was building. Chapter 29. The Morning. The day of the festival in San Diego began with excitement and grandeur. Early in the morning, the music band started playing, accompanied by the ringing of church bells and the bursting of fireworks. The townspeople woke up early and prepared themselves to join the celebration. They wore their finest clothes and jewelry and invited passers-by to taste the food they had prepared. Pilosopo Tasio, however, did not agree with this kind of celebration. According to him, it was just a waste of money and a way to show off. He believed it would be better to spend the money on more meaningful things, especially since many in the town had unmet needs. Don Filippo agreed with Pilosopo Tasio's view, but he didn't have the courage to oppose the priests. While the people, including the prominent figures of San Diego, waited at the church, Padre Damaso pretended to be sick to gain more attention from everyone. The church caretaker looked after him while he was ill. Around 8 in the morning, the long procession of various saints began. The procession clearly showed the differences in social status and even discrimination. Even those participating in the procession had lower social standing. The procession ended in front of Captain Tiago's house, where the Spaniards, along with Maria Clara and Ibarra, were waiting. Chapter 30. In the Church. Despite the heat and the crying of children, the church was packed with people eager to attend the Mass, which cost 250 pesos. At that time, it was believed that spending money on an expensive Mass was better than spending it on a comedy show, as it was thought to save souls from hell. Everyone waited for the arrival of the mayor before the Mass could begin. He intentionally arrived late to draw attention to himself, wearing 5 medals as symbols of his authority. When the mayor finally arrived, the Mass began, led by Padre Damaso. He took the opportunity to mock Padre Manuel Martin, who had led the Mass the day before. Padre Damaso placed himself on a pedestal, claiming he was better at conducting the Mass than Padre Manuel Martin. He continued to boast before finally starting his sermon. Chapter 31. The Sermon. Padre Damaso began his sermon in both Tagalog and Spanish, using a passage from the Bible. The sermon was about praising the holy saints of the church and great figures like King David, Gideon, and Roland. However, more than that, Padre Damaso used his sermon to mock Filipinos, especially since he did it in Spanish so most people wouldn't understand what he was saying. He also took the opportunity to embarrass people he didn't like. As the sermon went on, many in the crowd began to feel sleepy and yawn, including Captain Tiago, because they couldn't understand what the priest was saying. Meanwhile, Maria Clara and Ibarra secretly exchanged glances, expressing their feelings for each other through their eyes. When Padre Damaso switched to Tagalog, he shamelessly criticized Ibarra, though he didn't mention his name directly. Padre Salvi was not pleased with what was happening, so he rang the bell as a signal to end the sermon. However, Padre Damaso ignored it and continued preaching for another half hour. Meanwhile, Elias quietly approached Ibarra inside the church and warned him to be careful and avoid going near the stone that would be placed in the grave, as it could pose a danger to his life. No one noticed Elias's arrival or departure. Chapter 32, the Derrick. The yellowish individual demonstrated to Nol Juan how to use the panghugos, a tool for the inauguration of the schoolhouse being built by Ibarra. The panghugos was 8 meters tall, with 4 columns buried underground and strong ropes that seemed very sturdy. The yellowish individual proudly claimed he had learned this method from Ibarra's ancestor, Don Saturnino. On the day of the inauguration, the teachers and students prepared food for the guests, and a music band played. Padre Salvi began the blessing of the schoolhouse, and important documents, relics, and other items were placed in an iron box, which was then inserted into a lead cylinder. The yellowish individual held the rope that controlled the stone to be lowered into the ground. As Ibarra went down to join the ceremony, the rope suddenly slipped from the pulley, causing the panghugos structure to collapse. Despite the accident, Ibarra remained standing between the broken pulley and the large stone, but the yellowish individual died. Although the mayor wanted to arrest Nol Juan, Ibarra stopped him and said he would take full responsibility for everything. Chapter 33, Free Thought. Elias secretly arrived at Ibarra's house to talk about Ibarra's enemies. He warned Ibarra to be careful because many were plotting against him, including the yellowish individual who had planned to kill him during the schoolhouse inauguration. Elias revealed that he had been watching the yellowish individual and discovered that he had offered his services to Nol Juan despite the low pay in exchange for sharing his knowledge. Although Ibarra regretted the death of the yellowish individual, believing he could have shared more, Elias explained that the man would likely have escaped justice anyway because of the flawed system in their town. Ibarra became interested in Elias's unique way of thinking, especially regarding faith. Elias admitted that he was losing his trust in God. In the end, Elias said goodbye, carrying with him his promise of loyalty to Ibarra. Chapter 34, the Dinner. That day, the general was expected to arrive and stay at Capitan Tiago's house, so a luncheon was held with the prominent people of San Diego. Ibarra and the mayor sat across from each other at opposite ends of the dining table. Also present were Maria Clara, Capitan Tiago, town captains, priests, government officials, and friends of Maria Clara and Ibarra. During the luncheon, everyone noticed the absence of Padre Damaso. While eating, the guests talked about various topics, such as Padre Damaso's absence, the farmers' ignorance in using utensils, and the courses parents wanted their children to take. When Padre Damaso arrived, everyone greeted him except Ibarra. As beer was being served, Padre Damaso began making snide remarks against Ibarra, particularly about the death of the young man's father. It seemed the priest was deliberately trying to provoke Ibarra, to the point where Ibarra almost stabbed Padre Damaso. Fortunately, Maria Clara stopped him, calming Ibarra down, and he simply left. Chapter 35, Comments. The events at the luncheon, especially the conflict between Ibarra and Padre Damaso, became the talk of the town in San Diego. Many people sided with Padre Damaso and said Ibarra should have controlled himself to avoid trouble. However, Captain Martin understood Ibarra's anger because it's hard to stay calm when someone disrespects your own father. According to Don Filippo, Ibarra might have hoped the townspeople would support him as thanks for the good deeds he and his father had done. But the town captain believed the people couldn't do anything because the priests were always seen as right. Don Filippo added that the problem lay in the lack of unity among the townspeople, while the priests and the wealthy were united. The elderly women in town were afraid not to side with Padre Damaso, fearing they might go to hell. Meanwhile, Capitana Maria was pleased with Ibarra's actions in defending his father's memory. Another big topic was the possibility that the school construction might not continue, causing concern among the farmers for their children's future. Rumors also spread that the church construction might not proceed because Padre Damaso called Ibarra a filibustero, a term the farmers didn't understand. Chapter 36. The First Cloud. The Captain General arrived unannounced in Captain Tiago's town, causing everyone to rush in preparation for his arrival. While everyone was busy, Maria Clara continued to cry because her father had forbidden her from seeing Ibarra until he was no longer excommunicated. Tia Isabel and Andeng tried to comfort Maria Clara, but she couldn't stop crying. Tia Isabel suggested writing to the Pope and offering a large sum to lift Ibarra's excommunication, while Andeng offered to find a way for the lovers to talk. Captain Tiago went to the convent and informed Maria Clara of Padre Damaso's decision to break her engagement to Ibarra. Additionally, Padre Sabila ordered that Ibarra no longer be welcomed in their home, saying that the price for paying off a debt of 50,000 pesos would be the death of the soul in hell. Maria Clara became even more heartbroken upon hearing this, and even though her father tried to comfort her, she was further hurt when he mentioned that Padre Damaso had already chosen a new suitor for her, a relative of his who would come from Europe. Tia Isabel disagreed with the plan to replace Maria Clara's suitor, saying that changing lovers wasn't like changing clothes. Soon after, the Captain General arrived, and Captain Tiago's house was filled with guests. Maria Clara was deep in prayer when Tia Isabel came to tell her that the Captain General had summoned her. The young woman immediately obeyed. Chapter 37. His Excellency. When the Captain General arrived in town, he immediately asked to see Ibarra to speak with him. Before talking to the witnesses of the argument between Padre Damaso and Ibarra, the Captain General first spoke with a young man from Manila who was insisting on entering his office. The general spoke with him, and afterward the young man left the room smiling. This showed the fairness and good nature of the Captain General. Next, the general spoke with the friars, including Padre Salvi, Padre Sibila, and Padre Martin. Although they showed respect to the general, Padre Salvi tried to remind him of Ibarra's excommunication, but the general ignored him. Captain Tiago and Maria Clara also paid their respects to the general, who praised Maria Clara for her bravery and influence in stopping Ibarra from becoming too angry with Padre Damaso. The general wanted to reward her for her actions, but she declined. When Ibarra arrived, the general temporarily stopped talking to Maria Clara. The general greeted Ibarra and praised him for defending his father's memory. He promised to speak with the archbishop to lift Ibarra's excommunication. During their conversation, the general was impressed by Ibarra's intelligence and suggested that he move to Spain. However, Ibarra expressed his love for the Philippines and his desire to stay in his homeland. After their conversation, the general instructed Ibarra to visit Maria Clara and asked him to call for Captain Tiago. The general also told the mayor to protect Ibarra so he could carry out his plans. Finally, the general praised Captain Tiago for having a good daughter and future son-in-law, and even offered to be the godfather at the wedding of Ibarra and Maria Clara. Meanwhile, Ibarra went to see Maria Clara, but Sinang met him and told him to just write down what he wanted to say because they were about to leave for the theater. Chapter 38. The Procession. The procession in the town began with the ringing of bells and the sound of fireworks. Everyone carried candles and lanterns as they walked alongside the images of saints like San Juan Bautista, San Francisco, Santa Maria Magdalena, San Diego de Alcala, and the Virgin Mary. The carriage of San Diego was pulled by 6 Hermano Tercero. The Captain General, officials, mayor, lieutenant, Captain Tiago, and Ibarra all joined the procession together. Ibarra was forced to join because of the general's invitation. At Captain Tiago's house, the carriages and platforms carrying the saints were stopped to hold a poetic praise or loa in honor of the town's patron saint. 3 sacristans, a teacher, students, and children holding paper lanterns led the procession. A young boy with wings came out to recite the praise in Latin, Spanish, and Tagalog. Afterward, Maria Clara sang the Ave Maria, and everyone was captivated by her voice. Ibarra could feel the sadness in his beloved's voice. the Captain General briefly called Ibarra's attention to invite him to a meal and discuss the disappearance of the two sacristans, Crispin and Basilio. Chapter 39. Doña Consolacion. Doña Consolacion, the wife of the alferez, was introduced as a woman who tried hard to look European by putting on makeup and speaking in Spanish. She used to be a laundrywoman who married a soldier who later became an alferez. Even though she had risen in social status, she still carried the behavior of someone from a lower class, especially since she lacked education. One day, Doña Consolacion was furious because her husband did not allow her to go to church. While she was fuming, she heard Sisa singing from the jail. Sisa had been imprisoned there for 2 days. Because Sisa did not understand Doña's orders in Spanish, she did not obey. This made Doña Consolacion even angrier, and she took out all her rage on Sisa. She whipped Sisa and ordered her to sing. Out of fear and pain, Sisa sang Kundiman ng Gabi, which, despite her suffering, brought temporary joy to Doña. While listening, Doña noticed that she had unknowingly started speaking in Tagalog, something she did not want to do. In anger and embarrassment, she dismissed the civil guard who witnessed the incident. She then tried to make Sisa dance, but when Sisa refused, she whipped her again. Finally, Sisa fainted due to the intense pain and wounds. The alferez arrived and saw Sisa's pitiful condition. He was furious with Doña Consolacion and ordered a soldier to dress, feed, and treat Sisa. He also instructed the soldiers to take Sisa to Ibarra the next day. Chapter 40. Right and Might. The town festival began with the lighting of fireworks, signaling the start of the play. Don Filippo was in charge of the celebration. While the lieutenant and Pilosopo Tasio were talking about the lieutenant's resignation from his duties, important people from the town arrived, and the play Crispino della Comare began. While everyone was focused on the play, Padre Salvi secretly stared at Maria Clara. In the middle of the performance, Ibarra arrived, immediately catching the attention of the priests. The priest asked Don Filippo to remove Ibarra, but Don Filippo refused, fearing to disobey the Captain General and considering the large donation Ibarra had made. Because of this, the priest left the play, and Ibarra also left after saying goodbye to Maria Clara to attend to a forgotten appointment. As the play continued, 2 civil guards arrived, ordered by Doña Consolacion and the alferez to stop the show because they were being disturbed. Don Filippo refused the order, causing a commotion. The cuadrilleros arrested the 2 civil guards, and Ibarra quickly returned to look for Maria Clara. The angry men started throwing stones at the guards, but everyone calmed down when Elias spoke, advising them that there was nothing they could do in the situation. Padre Salvi continued to watch closely, and when Maria Clara fainted due to a vision, Ibarra carried her. In the end, Padre Salvi hurried to Captain Tiago's house to ensure Maria Clara was safe. He only breathed a sigh of relief when he saw the shadows of Maria Clara and Tia Isabel from outside the house. He left after making sure Ibarra was not inside. Chapter 41. 2 Visits. That night, Ibarra couldn't sleep because of the chaos that had happened. To distract himself, he continued working in his laboratory. While he was busy, Elias arrived to inform him that Maria Clara was sick and to ask if Ibarra had any instructions before he went to Batangas. Elias also explained how he had stopped the chaos the previous night by recognizing the civil guards and their debt of gratitude to him. After their conversation, Elias left. Ibarra quickly prepared himself to visit Maria Clara at Captain Tiago's house. While walking, he met Lucas, the brother of the yellowish individual who died in the accident during the construction of the school. Lucas was pestering Ibarra about the money their family should receive as compensation for his brother's death. Ibarra calmly told Lucas to come back another day because he was going to visit someone who was sick, but Lucas was persistent. In the end, Ibarra left to avoid losing his temper. Lucas was left angry, thinking of revenge because he believed Ibarra was just like his grandfather, who had caused their family's suffering. Chapter 42. The Espadañas. At Captain Tiago's house, there was a feeling of sadness because of Maria Clara's illness. Cousins Tia Isabel and Captain Tiago talked about which of the 2 crosses, the one in Tunison, or the one in Matahong should be given alms to help Maria Clara recover. In the end, they agreed to give alms to both crosses. Their conversation was interrupted when the couple de Espadaña arrived with their nephew, Linares. Dr. Tiburcio de Espadaña was a fake doctor who decided to stay in the Philippines after suffering many hardships during his journey from Spain. He was once poor and uneducated, working only as a cleaner in the San Carlos hospital. On the advice of fellow Spaniards, he pretended to be a doctor in the provinces, using only his Spanish identity as his qualification. Despite his fear and anxiety about the deception, he continued because of his desperate situation. Eventually, he became known and even tried to enrich himself by charging high fees, but his reputation was ruined when he was reported to the Protomedico de Manila. He lost his patience and was about to return to begging when he married a Filipina, Doña Victorina. Doña Victorina de Espadaña was an ambitious Filipina who acted like a European. She boasted that she was younger than her actual age and wanted to belong to the upper class. Her dream of marrying a foreigner came true, but what she got was Tiburcio, a poor and incompetent Spaniard. However, she dressed up her husband to make him look respectable and continued her illusion of being an orofia. She added de to her name to appear more aristocratic and spread rumors that she was pregnant, even though it wasn't true. Upon arriving at Captain Tiago's house, Doña Victorina introduced Linares to Captain Tiago. While they were having snacks, Padre Salvi arrived, who had known the couple for a long time, and they introduced Linares to him. Doña Victorina proudly boasted about her connections to high society, but was embarrassed to learn that the Captain General had already visited Captain Tiago's house. Later, they went to Maria Clara's room so Dr. Tiburcio could examine her. Tiburcio prescribed various medicines for the young woman, while Linares was captivated by Maria Clara's beauty. The conversation was cut short when Padre Salvi announced that Padre Damaso had arrived. Chapter 43. Plans. Padre Damaso entered Maria Clara's room, deeply concerned about the young woman's condition. The priest wept and declared that Maria Clara would not die, which surprised everyone because they did not expect the rough-mannered Padre Damaso to show such tenderness and love for the girl. After expressing his feelings, he left and went under the arbor to mourn. Meanwhile, Doña Victorina took the opportunity to introduce Linares to Padre Damaso. Linares was the godson of Padre Damaso's brother-in-law, Carlicos. Linares handed Padre Damaso a letter stating that he was looking for a wife and a job. Padre Damaso praised Linares and said it would be easy for him to find a job because he was a lawyer from the Universidad Central. As for finding a wife, Padre Damaso suggested he would talk to Captain Tiago about it, which saddened Padre Salvi. Meanwhile, Lucas went to Padre Salvi to seek justice for his late brother, who died in the accident during the construction of Ibarra's school. Lucas tried to act pitiful to gain the priest's sympathy, claiming that Ibarra had only paid him 500 pesos for his brother's life. However, Padre Salvi was not pleased with Lucas's acting and sent him away. Lucas had no choice but to leave, humiliated, muttering to himself. Chapter 44. An examination of conscience. Maria Clara's fever remained high, and whenever she became delirious, she would mention her mother's name. She continued to be cared for by Tia Isabel and their friends, while Captain Tiago tirelessly arranged masses and gave donations, including a golden cane for the Virgin of Antipolo. Despite the high fever, Maria Clara's condition gradually improved after taking the medicine prescribed by Don Tiburcio. This made the Espadaña couple happy, and for a while Doña Victorina stopped belittling Tiburcio. Padre Salvi, Captain Tiago, and the Espadaña couple discussed the upcoming transfer of Padre Damaso to the parish of Tayabas. Captain Tiago was worried because Maria Clara would be saddened by the departure of the priest, whom she considered like a father. According to Padre Salvi, it was also good that Ibarra and Maria Clara were no longer seeing each other, as it would help her recover completely. Doña Victorina claimed that Maria's recovery was due to Don Tiburcio's treatment, but Padre Salvi countered, saying that a clear conscience heals more than any medicine. Because of the argument, Doña Victorina suggested that Padre Salvi should treat Doña Consolacion through confession. Padre Salvi had no response, so he simply instructed Captain Tiago to prepare Maria Clara for confession and gave her a biatico to help her fully recover. Maria Clara drank the medicine prescribed by Don Tiburcio, but she stopped when she began to feel deafness. Maria also learned from Sinang that Ibarra had not written to her because he was busy trying to lift the excommunication against him. Tia Isabel arrived to prepare Maria for confession and help her forget Ibarra. During the confession, Tia Isabel noticed that Padre Salvi did not seem to be listening to Maria Clara's words, but was instead staring intently at her as if trying to understand the depths of her mind. After the confession, Padre Salvi left, pale, sweaty, and seemingly burdened by heavy thoughts. Chapter 45. The Hunted. In a cave in the forest, Elias found Captain Pablo after 6 months of not seeing each other. Elias had learned about Captain Pablo's fate 2 weeks earlier, and now they met to discuss their problems. Elias was close to Captain Pablo, whom he considered like a father, and he tried to convince the old man to join him in the lands of the indigenous people to live peacefully and forget the tragedies his family had endured. However, Captain Pablo refused Elias's invitation because he was determined to avenge his children, who had suffered at the hands of foreigners. Captain Pablo had 3 children, 2 sons and a daughter. His daughter had been exploited by a church official, and one of his sons investigated what happened. Because of this, his son was accused of a robbery at the convent, and although nothing was proven, he was arrested, hanged, and tortured by the authorities. Captain Pablo's other son was suspected of seeking revenge, and when he failed to present his identification one day, he was arrested, tortured, and eventually took his own life. For Captain Pablo, the only thing that mattered now was avenging his children. He planned to attack the town at the right time, along with other unfortunate individuals who were also being persecuted by the government. Elias understood Captain Pablo's desire for revenge, but he himself had chosen not to seek vengeance to avoid harming innocent people. Elias told Captain Pablo about his meeting and friendship with Ibarra. He spoke of Ibarra's good qualities and the oppression his family had suffered at the hands of the priests. Elias suggested that Ibarra might help bring their grievances to the general. Captain Pablo agreed, and they decided to find out Ibarra's answer after 4 days. If Ibarra agreed, their grievances would be addressed, but if not, Elias promised to join their cause. Chapter 46. The Cockpit. In the town of San Diego, like other towns under Spanish rule, there was a cockfighting arena. The arena was divided into 3 parts: the entrance, where a collector charged everyone who entered, the betting area, where wagers were placed and paid, and the ring, where the cockfights took place. On that day, some of the attendees at the cockfight were Captain Tiago, Captain Basilio, and Lucas. Captain Tiago's attendant brought a large white rooster, while Captain Basilio had a speckled rooster. After exchanging greetings, the two agreed to bet 300 pesos. Their bet became the talk of the arena, and soon other cockfighters joined in. The red rooster was at a disadvantage, while the white rooster was favored. Meanwhile, the brothers Tarsilo and Bruno, who had no money to bet, approached Lucas to borrow some. However, Lucas had a condition. They had to join an attack on the barracks and recruit more members to increase their reward. According to Lucas, he couldn't touch the money Ibarra had set aside for the operation, so he would only lend it if they agreed to the deal. At first, the brothers refused because they knew Ibarra and his connection to the Captain General. But when they saw Lucas give money to Pedro, they couldn't resist and agreed to Lucas's offer. Lucas told them that the weapons would arrive the next day, and they would receive their orders at 8 in the evening 2 days later. After the agreement, the cockfight continued, and the people became engrossed in their betting. Chapter 47. The Two Señoras. While a heated cockfight was happening, Doña Victorina and Don Tiburcio went for a walk to look at the houses of the locals. Doña Victorina got annoyed whenever people they passed by didn't show her respect, so she ordered Don Tiburcio to hit them with his hat, but he refused because of his disability. As they walked, they passed by the house of the Alferez, where Doña Consolacion was. Doña Victorina and Doña Consolacion locked eyes, and both gave each other sharp looks. Tension rose when Doña Consolacion spat, which angered Doña Victorina. Doña Victorina rushed at Doña Consolacion, and a heated argument broke out. Doña Victorina insulted Doña Consolacion, while Doña Consolacion mocked Doña Victorina's husband's disability and his pretentious behavior. During the fight, Doña Consolacion grabbed her husband's whip and charged at Doña Victorina, but they didn't hurt each other because their husbands stepped in. The townspeople and the priest saw what happened and tried to calm the two women down. Doña Consolacion called the priest a hypocritical Carlist, and the shouting continued. Doña Victorina tried to order Don Tiburcio to challenge the alferez to a duel, but he refused. Because of this, Doña Victorina snatched her husband's false teeth. After the incident, the couple went to Captain Tiago's house, where they saw Linares talking to Maria Clara and her friends. Doña Victorina pressured Linares to challenge the alferez to prove his bravery. She said that if he didn't do it, he wasn't worthy of Maria Clara. This scared Linares, and he didn't know what to do. After hearing this, Maria Clara asked to be taken to her room. The couple left with several thousand pesos as payment from Captain Tiago for Don Tiburcio's treatment of Maria Clara. Linares was left worried and uneasy because of his difficult situation. Chapter 48. The Enigma. Ibarra arrived at Captain Tiago's house to visit Maria Clara and share the news that he had been removed from excommunication. He showed the letter proving this to Tia Isabel, who was very happy for Ibarra. However, when Ibarra went to the balcony, he saw Maria Clara and Linares together, arranging flowers. Linares was surprised, while Maria Clara turned pale. After Ibarra explained the reason for his visit, Maria Clara's face showed sadness, so Ibarra quickly said goodbye, promising to return the next day. As Ibarra walked, he passed by the school being constructed and told the workers they no longer had to worry because the church had accepted him again. Noel Juan said that Ibarra's excommunication didn't matter to them because they were all considered excommunicated too. Ibarra saw Elias carrying stones and noticed that he seemed to have something to say. Ibarra instructed Noel Juan to give him the list of workers. Elias suggested that he and Ibarra talk while rowing on the lake, and Ibarra agreed. When Noel Juan arrived with the list, Ibarra noticed that Elias's name was not on it. Chapter 49. The Voice of the Hunted. In this chapter, Ibarra and Elias talked while riding in a boat. Ibarra felt uneasy, so Elias apologized for disturbing him. Ibarra mentioned that the alferez wanted to speak with him, but he made an excuse because he was afraid Elias might be seen. Ibarra also wanted to visit Maria Clara, which added to his worries. Elias didn't waste time and immediately shared his purpose. He was a messenger of the unfortunate who needed help to bring change to the government. Elias explained the requests of the unfortunate, applying justice, giving dignity to the people, and reducing the power of the civil guards, who were causing abuse. Although Ibarra was ready to use his wealth to seek help from his friends in Madrid and the Captain General, he worried that it might do more harm than good. According to Ibarra, reducing the power of the civil guards could put people in danger. Instead, he said that the root cause of society's problems needed to be treated, not just the symptoms, even if it meant applying painful remedies. Ibarra and Elias debated the role of the church and the reasons behind people turning to banditry. Although they both loved their country, Elias couldn't convince Ibarra to agree with his request. In the end, Elias said he would tell the unfortunate to simply put their hope in God. Chapter 50. Elias's Story. Elias shared his bitter past with Ibarra. His grandfather was a bookkeeper for a Spanish trading company. The office of his grandfather was burned down, and he was accused of arson. His wife, who was pregnant at the time, was also tortured by the authorities. The family fled to the mountains, but the newborn child died, and Elias's grandfather took his own life. The family moved to another province, and the eldest son became an outlaw. He burned and killed to avenge the oppression they suffered. Because of this, he became known as Balat. His mother was labeled a prostitute, a delinquent, and was publicly shamed, while his youngest sibling, who was kind, was simply called the mother's child. The youngest child had a relationship with a wealthy woman, and they had twin children, Elias and Concordia. The twins' mother died, and they grew up not knowing their father. Elias studied with the Jesuits, while Concordia was set to marry a young man. But their past ruined their future. Concordia disappeared, and her body was found on the shores of Calamba. Elias wandered and eventually met Ibarra. When Ibarra and Elias reached the shore, Ibarra said goodbye and told Elias to forget about him and not greet him if they ever met again. Elias returned to Captain Pablo's hideout and informed the captain that if he didn't die, he would fulfill his promise to join them when the leader decided it was time to fight against the Spaniards. Chapter 51. Exchanges. Linares felt troubled after receiving a letter from Doña Victorina. The letter said he had to challenge the alferez to a duel. However, he didn't know who would be willing to support him. He regretted boasting and lying just to gain Doña Victorina's favor. Meanwhile, Padre Salvi visited Captain Tiago's house. He brought news that Ibarra was no longer excommunicated. He described Ibarra as a good person, but sometimes impulsive. He also mentioned that the only person stopping Ibarra from being fully forgiven was Padre Damaso. If Maria Clara spoke to Padre Damaso, the priest would not be able to refuse her request. After hearing this, Maria Clara left the room with her friend, Victoria. Shortly after, Ibarra arrived at Captain Tiago's house with Tia Isabel. At that moment, Padre Salvi was still talking to Captain Tiago. Ibarra greeted Captain Tiago and Linares. Padre Salvi shook Ibarra's hand and told him that he had just been praising him. Ibarra was thankful for the kind words. Then, Ibarra approached Sinang and asked if Maria Clara was angry with him. Sinang said that Maria wanted Ibarra to forget about her. Despite this, Ibarra still wanted to talk to Maria Clara in person. In the end, he left the house. Chapter 52. The Cards of the Dead and the Shadows. In this chapter, a mysterious conversation took place among three shadows under the gate of a cemetery. They were discussing a plan to attack the civil guards, convents, and other institutions as revenge for the oppression they had experienced. It was revealed that Ibarra was the inspiration and leader of their movement. He had also sent the wife of one of the shadows to Manila for medical treatment, which convinced the man to join the uprising. When they noticed another shadow approaching, they stopped talking. Once they recognized each other, the newcomer explained that he was being followed, so they decided to split up. They agreed to receive their weapons the following night. With a cry of, "Long live Don Crisostomo!" the three shadows disappeared behind the wall, while the newcomer waited at the corner of the gate. Shortly after, another shadow arrived and looked around. Since it was drizzling, the shadow took shelter under the gate and met the first shadow who had also taken cover. They decided to gamble, with the winner staying behind to gamble with the dead. They entered the cemetery, and on top of a tomb, Elias and Lucas gambled against each other. In the end, Elias lost and left silently, swallowed by the darkness. Chapter 53. Il buon di si conosce da mattina. The next day, news spread about strange lights seen in the cemetery the previous night. According to the members of the Brotherhood of San Francisco, 20 candles were lit there. Hermana Sepa, whose house was far from the cemetery, claimed she heard wailing and sobbing coming from the area. Meanwhile, the priest emphasized in his sermon the plight of souls in purgatory. These events did not escape the sharp eyes of Don Filippo and Pilosopo Tasio, who had been feeling weak for several days. They discussed how the mayor had already accepted Don Filippo's resignation from his position. However, Pilosopo Tasio was uneasy, believing that Don Filippo's resignation was ill-timed, especially during a period of unrest. According to Pilosopo Tasio, in times of conflict, a leader should stay with his people. Their conversation continued, touching on changes in the town, religion, the behavior of the youth, and the state of the Philippines. Pilosopo Tasio shared his thoughts, saying that the young people who had studied in Europe had gained broad knowledge, equipping them to lead and shape their world. He added that the convent could no longer stop the spread of modern civilization. When Don Filippo noticed Pilosopo Tasio's weakness, he asked if he needed medicine. Pilosopo Tasio replied that those who are dying no longer need medicine, but those who are left behind do. He also requested Don Filippo to tell Ibarra to meet with him, as he felt his death was near. Despite being on the brink of death, Pilosopo Tasio still thought about the welfare of the town, which he believed was still lost in darkness. In the end, Don Filippo bid him farewell. Chapter 54. Revelations. Padre Salvi hurried to the house of the Alferez to report an upcoming rebellion he had discovered through a confession. The priest revealed that an attack on the barracks and the convent was planned for that very night, so they agreed to prepare for it. The priest requested 4 civil guards to protect the convent, while the soldiers secretly prepared at the barracks to capture the rebels alive. Meanwhile, a man rushed to Ibarra's house to warn him about the impending attack and confessed that Ibarra was suspected of being the mastermind behind the rebellion. Elias advised Ibarra to burn all his books and documents to avoid being implicated in the trouble. While burning the papers, Elias came across a document about Don Pedro Ibarra Mendia, Ibarra's ancestor, and discovered the connection between Ibarra's family and the tragic fate of his own family. Elias decided to draw his dagger to seek revenge, but in the end, he realized his anger and let go of the weapon. He quickly left Ibarra's house, while Ibarra continued burning the documents. Chapter 55. The Catastrophe. A major commotion took place at Capitan Tiago's house. Maria Clara and Sinang were restless while waiting for Ibarra's arrival. Padre Salvi, feeling uneasy, paced back and forth in the hall. When 8 o'clock struck, Ibarra was startled by the sudden sound of gunfire. Tia Isabel prayed fervently, while Padre Salvi hid. The people in the house heard the gunshots coming from the convent and chaos ensued. After the gunfire, Ibarra hurried home. He ordered his servant to prepare his horse and began gathering his important belongings, including documents and a picture of Maria Clara. But before he could leave, soldiers arrived and took him away. Meanwhile, Elias, deeply troubled, entered Ibarra's house and tried to hide evidence by burning papers and belongings. When the soldiers arrived, it was too late. The evidence had already been burned and an explosion occurred, halting their raid. Chapter 56. Rumors and Belief. Fear and unease filled the town of San Diego. No one could be seen on the streets, and the surroundings seemed swallowed by silence. Slowly, however, people gathered the courage to open their windows and share news with one another. It was said that a horrifying incident had occurred the previous night, compared to the raid led by Balat. Rumors spread that Captain Pablo was behind the attack. According to some, the cuadrilleros were the ones who arrested Ibarra. There was also news that Ibarra had tried to run away with Maria Clara to prevent her marriage to Linares, but he failed because Captain Tiago and the civil guards stopped him. A man from the tribunal revealed that Bruno had confessed about the relationship between Ibarra and Maria Clara. It was also disclosed that Ibarra had planned to take revenge on the church, and it was fortunate that Padre Salvi was at Captain Tiago's house at the time. It was said that the civil guards burned down Ibarra's house. At the end of the chapter, a woman claimed she had seen Lucas hanging under a santol tree. Chapter 57. Vae Victis. The chapter shows the extreme cruelty of the civil guards as they interrogate the prisoners captured after the recent chaos. The guards threaten children who peek through the bars to look at the prisoners. The alferez, along with his wife Doña Consolacion, is also there to watch the horrifying scene. The priest, Padre Salvi, arrives and asks if Ibarra and Don Filippo are involved in the raid. He is accompanied by a crying child with blood on his pants. A prisoner named Tarsilo Alasagan is questioned about Ibarra's involvement in the raid, but Tarsilo insists that their attack was to avenge their father, who was killed by the civil guards. Tarsilo is shown 5 corpses, including his brother Bruno, but he remains silent and gives no information. As punishment, he is beaten with a cane until his body bleeds, but he still does not break. When he is brought back to the hall, Tarsilo is again asked if he knows another prisoner, but he answers that he only saw him there for the first time. He is tortured again until his body is covered in blood, and Padre Salvi can no longer bear the violence, so he leaves the hall. Outside, he sees the sister of Bruno and Tarsilo crying and counting the lashes she hears. Despite all the torture, Tarsilo asks for a quick death and is thrown into a foul-smelling well, where he dies. After this, the guards turned their attention to a madman named Andong, who was arrested for entering the courtyard to relieve himself. In the end, the alferez grows tired of Andong's answers and orders him to be put back in jail. Chapter 58, The Accursed. The families of the prisoners are confused and anxious, desperately seeking justice for their loved ones. The people are filled with fear and suffering because they have no one strong to turn to for justice. Some of them blame everything on Ibarra. When afternoon came, the prisoners were taken to a cart surrounded by soldiers. Among all the prisoners, only Ibarra's name was not called. Instead, he was accused of being a coward and cursed by the people, even his ancestors, until they called him a heretic and demanded he be hanged. They even threw stones at him while he remembered Elias's story about the woman who saw a head hanging from a tree. No one wanted to stand by Ibarra, not even Sinang, who was forbidden by Captain Basilio to cry. Ibarra deeply felt his separation from his homeland, love, home, friends, and a bright future. In the end, Pilosopo Tasio left and was found lying at the doorstep of his house the next day. Chapter 59, Patriotism and Private Interests. The recent uprising by the oppressed became a hot topic, making headlines in Manila. The people in the convent were busy visiting and interviewing to find out what really happened. Some offered help to the government, which they believed was in danger. Meanwhile, Padre Salvi was seen as a hero by some and was said to deserve a bishop's mitre. In Tondo, Captain Tinong was restless because he feared being implicated in the accusations against Ibarra. His wife, Capitana Tinchang, kept blaming him, saying she would have presented herself to the Captain General if she were a man. They called their cousin Don Primitivo for advice, and he told them that Tinong should give a gift to the general and burn all documents that could cause trouble. At a gathering in Intramuros, the uprising and Ibarra's involvement were discussed. One lady even said that the natives had no sense of gratitude and should not be treated as real people. Suddenly, the conversation shifted to the news that Capitana Tinchang had given a diamond ring as a gift to the general. In the end, soldiers arrived with invitations for some wealthy and prominent people in Tondo, including Captain Tinong, to go to Fuerza de Santiago. Chapter 60, Maria Clara Weds. In this chapter, Captain Tiago is shown to be very happy because he was not arrested or even questioned by the government. As a sign of gratitude, he held masses in different churches. Meanwhile, the opposite happened to Captain Tinong, who went to the government and ended up falling ill due to fear and anxiety. Linares and the couple, the de Espadañas, arrived at Captain Tiago's house. They discussed the upcoming wedding of Maria Clara and Linares. Captain Tiago decided to marry his daughter to Linares because he believed it would open the doors of the palace for him. At Captain Tiago's house, various personalities were present, such as Padre Salvi, Padre Sibila, the Franciscans and Dominicans, the alferez, the de Espadaña couple, and Lieutenant Guevara. The guests talked about the upcoming wedding of Maria Clara and Linares. One of the female guests called Maria foolish for thinking that Linares was only after her wealth. Lieutenant Guevara eased everyone's fear that Ibarra might be hanged, saying he would only be exiled. Maria went to the azotea of their house. There, she saw a boat slowly approaching their home. The boat was full of grass and had two men on board, Elias and Ibarra. It turned out that Elias had saved Ibarra from his misfortune. Ibarra only passed by to express his feelings to Maria and to give her the freedom to decide about their agreement. Because of this, Maria confessed the reason why she was marrying Linares. Maria said she was forced to give up their love because of her deceased mother and her two living fathers. However, she said she did not love Linares and that Ibarra was the only one she truly loved. Ibarra tightly hugged and kissed Maria Clara. In an instant, he jumped back over the wall and returned to the boat. Meanwhile, Elias knelt before Maria, removed his hat, and then left the area as the young woman's tears fell. Chapter 61, The Chase on the Lake. Elias continued to take Ibarra to Mandaluyong to hide him in a friend's house. Elias also made sure he would return Ibarra's money, which he had hidden in a balete tree. Ibarra offered Elias to come with him to another country, but Elias refused. While sailing, they noticed chaos in the palace and were stopped by a guard. When asked where they came from, Elias said he was from Manila and was delivering grass to the judge and the priest. The guard allowed them to continue but warned them not to take any prisoners on board. They kept rowing until they reached the Pasig River and arrived in Santa Ana. Along the way, they passed by the vacation house of the Jesuits, where Elias remembered his past. When the guards spotted their boat on the lake, Elias tried to avoid the civil guards chasing them. But since they had no weapons, Elias decided that he and Ibarra would meet again on Christmas Eve at the cemetery of Ibarra's ancestor. Elias jumped into the water and kicked the boat to make it disappear from the guards' sight. The civil guards shot at Elias, and they saw blood in the water. In the end, the guards chose to leave. Chapter 62. Padre Damaso explains. Maria Clara was deep in thought, feeling very sad about the news of Ibarra's death. Even though many gifts were prepared for her, she did not care about them. Then, Padre Damaso arrived, and Maria Clara immediately asked for his help. She wanted him to cancel her arranged marriage to Linares and protect her father. Maria Clara told him that she would never marry anyone else except Ibarra. For her, only two choices remained. Either she would die or enter a convent. Padre Damaso was shocked and thought deeply about what she had said. He felt sorry for Maria Clara and with tears in his eyes, expressed his deep love for her. In the end, Padre Damaso decided that it was better to let Maria Clara enter the convent rather than let her die. Before he left, he looked up to the sky and asked God for forgiveness. He prayed that he would be the one to suffer instead of Maria Clara. Chapter 63. Christmas Eve. In a small hut in the mountains, a Tagalog family lived by hunting and gathering wood. Basilio and a young girl lived there. An old man had taken care of Basilio when he found him wounded. Basilio shared his life story, and the old man allowed him to return home. He even gave Basilio some dried venison to bring to his mother, Sisa. It was Noche Buena in the town of San Diego, but the people were sad. The mood was also somber at Captain Basilio's house, where he was talking to Don Filippo. Don Filippo had been cleared of the accusations against him. They saw Sisa, but she didn't harm anyone. Sinang received a letter from Maria Clara, but she was afraid to open it. News spread that Linares was the reason Captain Tiago escaped the death penalty. Basilio finally reached his home, but Sisa wasn't there. He saw her at the house of the Alperes singing. When Sisa saw the guards, she ran, and Basilio followed her. While running, Basilio was hit on the head by a servant woman, but he kept running until they reached the forest. Sisa entered the cemetery of an old Spanish man near a balete tree. Basilio hugged Sisa, and she stopped running. Finally, Sisa recognized her son and suddenly collapsed. When Basilio woke up, he found that Sisa had died. Basilio hugged his mother and cried. As he looked up, he saw a wounded man watching them, and they spoke. The man was Elias. He hadn't eaten for 2 days and seemed close to death. Elias couldn't help Basilio bury his mother, so he told him to go to the balete tree to gather firewood. Elias instructed Basilio to cremate their bodies. Elias also mentioned that there was a great treasure buried near the balete tree. If no one else came, Basilio could use the treasure for his education. Elias prayed and said he would die without seeing the dawn of his beloved country. As he looked at the sky, he slowly fell to the ground. The whole town of San Diego witnessed the large fire where Sisa and Elias died. Because of this, Manang Rufa blamed the person who started the fire, saying they didn't respect the birth of Jesus. Chapter 64. Epilogue. In this chapter, the fates of the main characters are described after the events of the previous chapters. Padre Damaso moved to Manila after Maria Clara entered the convent, but he was later found dead in his room, supposedly due to a nightmare. Padre Salvi temporarily served in the Santa Clara convent while waiting to become a bishop. Meanwhile, Captain Tiago suffered deep sadness and emotional pain after Maria Clara entered the convent. He lost his trust in people and gave himself over to gambling, cockfighting, and smoking marijuana. In the end, He completely neglected himself, and people forgot about his former fame and honor. On the other hand, Doña Victorina continued pretending to be from Andalusia, even adding curls to her hair. She now took charge of driving the carriage and no longer allowed her husband Don Tiburcio to do anything. He had lost his teeth, strength, and reputation as a doctor. And that concludes our discussion of the summary of each chapter of Noli Me Tangere. If you found this video helpful, we encourage you to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to stay updated on our future videos. Until next time, thank you for watching.